The hardest part about sales training and sales coaching is it's very specific. And what I mean by that is there are, off the top of my head, I could probably think of 9 or 10 different types of sales. If you're in IT sales, that's very different to car sales. If you're in account management for an advertising agency, that's very, very different to door-to-door solar. If you're in fundraising, it's very different to insurance sales over the phone. Or lead generation for various, financial institutions, all sorts of different things. And why I've always been very apprehensive to teach sales. Every time I see a sales coach bring out a sales book, I always struggle with it because it's just such a broad net to cast when there's so many different nuances that make you great. But over the years, what I've found is that there are some fundamental principles that apply in every single discipline of sales that are going to help you improve your ability to make more sales, to have better engagement with customers, to have better relationships with customers, to encourage repeat purchase, and essentially just make your job a whole hell of a lot easier. And so what I want to teach today in this short video seminar, I really want to get across the fundamental things that differentiate good salespeople from great salespeople. And ideally give you guys some value so that you can then take that into whatever discipline you want to apply it. Whether that's you owning your own business and trying to get more sales, or if you're starting in a new sales role, or if you're in an existing sales role and just want to up your scores and just need more resources to help you get there. What I've designed is a very simple 6-step program that's going to help you really get your game to where it needs to be. I don't want to take too much time. Like I said, it's a short video seminar, but what we really want to cover are the absolute basics. Now, the first thing that you know in sales is the thing that every single person in sales should know already, which is your basic sales model. The traditional one that's known is either intro, problem, solution, close. That came out, in the sort of the mid to late 1900s. Eventually, that got overtaken by more of a marketing strategy, which is your AIDA model, which is your attention, interest, desire, action. They're all both fantastic models, but as sales evolves, you're finding you do need to add a little bit more specificity in the way that you explain and break down the process. So how you do that it's really a 6-step model. It's not just your traditional 4 steps. And I'll go with the basic one. I'll go with intro, problem, solution, close, just to keep it consistent, right? So you have your introduction, you have your problem, you have your solution, right? And obviously you've got your close. The problem is, people are exposed, on average, to 3,000 or more pieces of advertising or sales material in a single day. Whether that's scrolling on your social media, whether that's driving down the road, whether that's getting to a movie a bit early, you're going to be exposed to so many pieces of sales and advertising that you're going to build up a natural tolerance to that. So therein lies the problem. Sometimes this isn't going to be enough, and that's where you really have to isolate and understand the value of handling objections. Because people are so used to being sold, they're naturally getting stronger at resisting that sale. So adding objection handling is a really important part, and it's obviously something that everyone in sales knows. Anyone who really gets it. One of the old sayings is the sale starts at no. And really getting the idea that, when customers test you and push you, you're okay to push back, and you're okay to back your product and back yourself, and as long as you know what you're really trying to achieve, which is to help them solve a problem or address a need. So objection handling is a super important part of really growing your sales strategy. But the last thing, if you've mastered all of those steps, and this is something people don't always think about, is anytime that you're in sales, you're still looking for repeat business. One way or another, you're looking for repeat business. How do you mean? Well, if I'm selling a subscription service, I want to make sure that they stay on that subscription. I want to make sure that I've left them with a great feeling and a rational decision, and I'm really helping them continue on, right? If I'm selling a one-off, right? Well, a lot of times they'll come back. That might break, and they might need another one, or that hit its use by date. They need another one, or they might want more products from you because they trust you and trust your brand, right? Or even if it's something that you really ideally wouldn't want another one of. Like let's say you're talking about like surgery. If you're going to get surgery, chances are you don't really want another surgery, not unless you're you're living in Hollywood and your last name starts with a K. But if you're really thinking about repeat business, referrals count as that as well. If I did a good job with you and I gave you a great service or product, you're generally going to refer that on to other people. So the experience that you leave people with is so important. And there's a very natural human bias called recency, where your last impression of something has a tremendous impact on your whole impression of it, as an entirety. So even if I did an amazing job, if I left it on a slightly sour note, that's going to sour the entire experience. So one of the most important things that you can do here is what's called a rehash or consolidation. So those 6 steps, if you look at any sale, you're looking at the idea. So before I actually break that down, I want you to really get your head around the idea of what actually is sales. Because one of my I wouldn't call it a pet peeve, but one of the things I've always taken issue with is a lot of people have a very negative connotation towards sales. They get a lot of people that say things like, oh, I could never do what you do. And always it comes to mind is there's a scene in Troy where Brad Pitt's playing Achilles, and one of the young kids wakes him for a fight, and it's against this gigantic, behemoth of a man. And they say, I don't know if I would fight him. I'd be scared to fight him. And Achilles looks at him and looks at the kid, and he says, and that's why no one will remember your name. And anytime I have an interaction with someone that's obviously a little bit more on the introverted side or a bit more on the more risk-averse side, and they see that I'm running sales businesses and organizations, they say, I could never do that. I said, and that's why no one will remember your name. So how the whole idea of sales really should relate. I always, whenever I do a speech, a seminar where I'm teaching people, I say, "What can you define sales for me?" And they say, "Oh, it's making someone buy something, or it's giving someone a product or a service, or it's some people will take it quite negative and say it's manipulating people, and all of those are wrong. When you think about sales, especially in a business context, sales is about identifying a need. It's helping someone identify a need that they have and then using what you have to help provide a solution to that. That's all sales is. And if you really think about it, that's actually quite a benevolent thing. And what I find, the best salespeople, the people who are the most talented in sales, they're the ones that are the first to actually turn people down if they don't need something. And I think it's, part of it's because they're so confident in their abilities that they can, that they know that, well, if this person's not right, I'm just going to get someone else. So they don't have any sort of desperation. They're filled with indifference. But the other side of it is if you truly believe what you're selling, if you truly believe in the product or service that you're selling, you have a moral obligation to convince people to use it. You actually have a need within yourself if you know that you can help them. Let's say if I were a doctor, and I know for certain that if someone takes a certain medication that I'm going to prescribe and they refuse to take that, I'm gonna feel inclined to make them, to encourage them to take it. And we have to think of ourselves as salespeople as someone who does that. And so really understanding the concept of sales will help you overcome a lot of what I call the internal objection. The internal objection is the idea that just because you wouldn't buy something doesn't mean somebody else wouldn't. A lot of us, it's really about understanding everybody thinks differently. There's another human bias called projection, where people naturally think that other people think the way that they think. And that it couldn't be farther from the truth. But just because, let's say I'm selling life insurance. Well, I don't have life insurance, right? I'm young, I'm healthy, this is a hypothetical. If I feel that way, if I'm approaching other customers thinking, oh, they probably won't want this, I'm never going to make that sale. But for some people, it's not just the idea of protecting their friends and family. It's about telling themselves what they're worth. Are you worth $1 million? If you get $1 million life insurance policy, are you worth $1 million? And for me, that doesn't mean a lot because I own many businesses, and I know that I'm dictating my worth every day. But for someone else, that might really mean something to them. And so giving them that sense of value and self-worth also goes into the protection and that they can be offering their family in the worst of cases. So these are all hypothetical situations, but really getting your head around the concept of sales is so important, and it's fundamental before it can even actually address the sales tactics. You have to look at really what's important, which is if you believe in what you're doing, if you believe in the service or product that you're providing, that's going to do 90% of the job anyway. Now, when we're looking at the actual model, so if we're looking at our 6-step model, which is our intro, problem, solution, close, objection handles, and consolidation. Sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but every single person who's been in sales knows that you have to follow this system. Let's talk about why. Introductions are very important. People need to know that they trust you. One of the most important things that really applies in sales is if somebody thinks you're a salesman or a saleswoman, if you come across like a salesperson, there's an immediate subconscious reaction where somebody will put you in that box. They'll pigeonhole you as a salesperson. And all that means is that no matter what you do or what you say, their loss is going to equal your gain. The moment somebody thinks that you want something from them, they're not going to give you that trust or that comfort or that vulnerability that's actually required in order for them to allow you to lead them through a sales process. So if you appear like a salesman, if you smell like a salesman, you're going to lose that customer right away. So your introduction is very important to obviously, create a relationship, but you also have to engage them. You have to get them hooked into what we're doing, and you have to disqualify yourself from that traditional sales model. Especially in things like door-to-door sales or shopping center, a kiosk, that kind of thing. People a lot of time will just, as they pass you by, they say, "Oh no, I'm not interested." And that can be quite daunting for people when they first start, because it's, what are they really not interested in? And a lot of people take that personally. They take it personally that, oh, they're not interested in me, and that's not true. They're not interested in every other boring, lame salesperson they've ever experienced. They're not interested in being sold to. But remember, if we're salespeople, we're not actually selling anything. What we're doing as salespeople is we're trying to help them address their needs. So the first and most important thing is being able to relate to them, engage them to what we're doing, and disqualify yourself from being that traditional sales figure. Once we've done that, once we've got what I call permission to pitch, then we can go through the actual pitch itself. Now, like I said, if you understand what a salesperson does, what you're really doing is you're helping identify a need. This is where your problem comes into play. You can't just come to somebody. Let's say I'm selling IT. If I just walk up to somebody and said, "Hey, we got some amazing IT. You want to do it? It's going to really help." You haven't given them any leverage on actually doing it. Or if you're selling advertising and you say, "Hey, we got really good deals on really good ads." There are a small subsect of people who will say, "Great, I've been looking for advertising." But it's about 3% on average. The majority of people, they don't have that awareness of their need right away, or they don't have at the very least they're in an information gathering stage. So it's the equivalent of you as if you're ignoring highlighting the problem, it's the equivalent of walking up to a man or a woman in a bar and saying, "Hey, will you marry me?" after meeting them for the first time. There's stages to it. You need to get that engagement, and you have to create that leverage. And this is where you find it. Is you're actually highlighting not only the problem itself, but you're highlighting the implications of that problem. And what that creates within a person is tension. And what you find with tension, what does tension generally seek? Well, tension will always try and seek release. So essentially, why you're providing this problem, it's very important. It's so that you can provide the solution. Because if you don't provide this doesn't matter. So really highlighting the need and letting them experience the implication of that need is so important, because what it does, it then makes the solution matter. You don't want to be guilt tripping people into signing up or buying things. Absolutely not. But what you need to be able to do is be able to generate that leverage and that tension so that something happens. I always liken it to reversing a car. I remember when I learned how to drive a car for the first time, my father said, I said, how long should you reverse for? And he says, only reverse as far as you need to. Likewise with your problem. You don't want to be, ruining people's day and guilt tripping them, but you want to be generating it only as much as you need to, and then you can go into the solution. Once you've gone through that, once you understand the process, you know that you've got to close. And closing is actually the easiest part. The analogy that I love, I heard a really good analogy for this. It's think of the last time you went to a shoe shop, like a Foot Locker or something like that. You know, a lot of people say, especially when they first start in sales, they go, I got to work on my clothes. And that actually couldn't be farther from the truth. And stay with me here. So you imagine you're in a Foot Locker, right? So you've already got a need. You've already got a need because you need shoes. But you look on the wall, and you see on this wall, you see all these various different styles of sneaker, and you grab the one you like, and you flag down the referee, the store attendant, and you say, hey, do you have these in my size? Do you have them in an 11.5? And they go, yeah, sure, just let me go check. So they go into this storeroom, and they come on back out, and they bring you this box, and what do? You take the shoe out, you grab the paper out of it, and then you put them on. And then what do we start doing? Well, for some reason, we start doing these weird little hokey-pokey moves to make sure it fits that we never actually do in real life, but for some reason do at a Foot Locker. And you get the feel for it. And then you look in the mirror and you're like, yeah, I like it. And maybe your partner's there, your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You go, what do you think? And they go, yeah, you look good. And you're like, yeah, damn right, I look good, right? So we've all been there and we get it. But then we put the shoe back in the box and then we walk up to the register. Does the cashier have to close you? And the answer is obviously no. And why doesn't the cashier have to close you? Well, it's because you've already bought it here. You've identified your need, and then you've gotten excited about the solution. All the cashier has to do in their close is get out of the way. So when you're really closing, the focus is so important. The focus is on making sure that you're just making it confident, certain, and that you're showing complete indifference. And I'll cover that in a bit more depth. Next up is our objection handles. Like I said, the sale starts at no. So when you look at your traditional model, it's fine and dandy to have a great pitch, but people are naturally going to be resistant. Why is that? Well, number one, like I mentioned before, they're so accustomed to being hit with different sales pitches every single day. There's a natural tolerance to it. But more importantly, there is a very natural tendency for the human brain to say no to things. Well, why is that? Well, if you think about it, the human brain, it's just a piece of equipment designed to keep you safe. And so if its natural tendency is to keep you safe, what you know is going to be much preferred to things you don't know. So it likes the status quo. You have to challenge that. So even if somebody wants something, sometimes they'll just say no because it's just a natural reaction. Think about it. Have you ever been at, like when you were a kid, did you ever go to a friend's house and you've been playing all day and the mom says, would you like a glass of water? And you go, no, I'm okay. And then you think about it, you're like, oh man, I actually really would have liked that glass of water. Or, I do this all the time. When I get receipts for my fuel, when I pay for my fuel, and they say, oh, would you like a receipt? And I go, no, I'm okay. And then I've got to just shamefully walk back in and say, actually, I'm sorry, can I get that receipt, right? We naturally say no to things. And being able to understand that that's a part of the process and not take it personally when people say, oh, I'm sorry, I just, I need to talk to my partner, or I just don't know if I can afford it. That's part of the game. I had a really funny story with that. One of my top reps, Zach, he was signing this guy up to a product or a service in a door-to-door campaign, and he gets the guy through the process, and he goes to the close, and he says, yeah, like, does that sound fair enough? And the customer goes, yeah, look, I just got to talk to my girlfriend about it. She's a bit of a nutcase with this kind of thing. And he just did the exact thing that he should. He said, that's okay, but obviously you see value in what we're doing today. Just your textbook standard deflection. And the guy goes, yeah, all right. So he ends up putting him back on the form and gets him through the sign-up process. And at the very end of the sale, it's on a very jovial, positive note. But the guy says, hey, look, I just have one thing to admit. And he goes, yeah, sure. What is it? The guy goes, I don't have a girlfriend. I don't know why I said that. and if that doesn't go to show that people naturally are adverse to things, I don't know what does. So really understanding that you can't legitimize people's objections, and having a great system where you can handle that is really beneficial. Lastly, and this is the most important one, like I said, you're trying to get repeat business. You're consistently trying to get repeat business. Well, if we're trying to get repeat business, you can't just leave after you get what you want, right? You got to stick around for cuddles. Don't be that guy that doesn't, or that girl that doesn't. So understanding the value of consolidation, it's, you're trying to really create a real tether and an anchor to you and to the product and to what you're doing. But there's also another really psychological component to rehashing that doesn't get talked about often. Obviously, this process itself is a very emotional pitch. It's a very, you're creating need and you're identifying people's serious issues to create that leverage. And then you're providing them with excitement and relief in order to hit that solution. And the close is still quite high energy, even if it is very indifferent. But, and getting through the objection handles is part of the game, right? You're still re-impulsing, and a lot of times you need to get that impulse over the line. It's a very emotional experience. And the problem is when the emotion wears off, a lot of times we'll get that what's called cognitive dissonance. They'll get what's called buyer's remorse. And they'll think, oh, I was really excited and I was happy. But now that the emotion's gone and it's gone back to a rational decision, did I really need that item? And I think a lot of us have experienced that before. So when you look at the consolidation, it's not just about that feel-good factor. When you're looking at consolidation, what's really important is you're taking the emotional side and you're actually bringing it back down to reason. So you're taking the emotional component, you're explaining to them everything that they're doing and reminding them why it's beneficial. And I even go so far as asking them to tell me what inspired them to purchase. Because now they're actually selling it to you and they're re-impulsing themselves to stay on or to continue or to refer. And then obviously you give them the big thank you and you leave the relationship on a good note. And provide whatever follow-up service that you need to. But the consolidation is a really important part of the sales system. And so understanding these 6 steps is so important because every single sale needs to go through this, right? Even if you were to, in chess they have a move called fool's mate, right? Where you can actually put someone into checkmate within about 3 or 4 moves. But it requires that you get your bishop and your queen out really quickly. Now, obviously, the queen being the most powerful piece, it's quite a formidable adversary. But the problem with fool's mate is if somebody sees it coming, if someone has any idea how to play chess on a reasonable level, you've now got your queen out in the open and super vulnerable. And more often than not, you're going to lose your most powerful piece. So every so often, even if you're not using a technical system like these 6 steps, you might still make a sale. It's the equivalent, there's one guy out there who will go up to 100 women in a nightclub and say, hey, do you want to go home with me? Bang. Hey, do you want to go home with me? Bang. But eventually one of those women will say yes. This is all hypothetical. I hope it's not too misogynistic, right? But you may have a customer that comes right to you and says, let's say you're selling painting supplies and they say, hey, I need painting supplies. That'll do. You may get one of those, but that shouldn't reinforce that you don't use a consistent system every time and have a consistent pitch every time. And so don't play fool mate. Make sure that you've got a really rock solid technical foundation where you understand why each part of your pitch is there. Anyone who's read the Art of War or the Book of 5 Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, any of those ancient warfare, one of the fundamental underlying principles with all of those is don't have anything unnecessary in the way that you live and act. Because anything unnecessary, anything superfluous can slow you down. So you have to understand why every part of your pitch has something to do with what you're doing, why it adds benefit to the process. Because if it doesn't, it shouldn't be in there.